Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. This is the last in our series on drawer making. Number 4, it's fitting the bottom. We're going to use solid wood. Opens up a lot of opportunities. I'm going to show you how. I'm Rob Cosman and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new and you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so you'll receive alerts when we release a new video. And anytime we use a special tool, we'll always leave a description down below. All right, let's get to work. In our last video, if you didn't see it, we'll leave a link below. But we finished the construction of the drawer and fitting it to the opening. So we've got everything except obviously a bottom in there. Now, primarily there's two options. You can either use a plywood bottom. I suppose you could even use particle board. But I would say plywood bottom or a solid wood bottom. I'm going to show you two examples. Here's a plywood bottom. If you're using plywood, it's real simple. Have a groove on 3 sides, put your plywood in, you can glue it in place, fasten it to the back, and you're done. No expansion to worry about, no issues. This, however, is a solid wood bottom. This is actually made out of eastern cedar, so it's got a little bit of smell, which is nice. If this is what you're going to do, then you have to allow for seasonal expansion. That means it has to go into the drawer a specific way, and you have to allow for that movement so that it will not destroy your drawer. That's what I'm going to use. That's the traditional way of doing it. I think it looks the best. I think it just adds an element to the drawer that you just can't get otherwise. Some would argue, but this is my preferred method. So if we're going to go with solid wood bottom, here's what has to happen. The bottom has to have the grain running side to side. The reason is, and this is a piece of northern cedar, has a lot of knots. You almost have to live with that. This board is going to expand this way. It's going to shrink and expand. It's not going to change in length. So if we put it in here like this and fit it into the grooves, seasonally that is going to push out on the sides and it'll bind itself in there and you will not be able to move the drawer. But if we turn and we run the grain like this, now side to side, it's going to be perfect. We can actually bottom out, meaning go right to the bottom of those grooves, which will do a lot to help to prevent this from racking. I'll explain that a little later. And as it expands now, it's going to go out that way. We can glue it here along the front, but underneath here where we attach it to the back, we are going to have to allow for that movement. And we do that by simply using a couple of screws and with a slot that allows it to shrink or to pull in, shrink, or expand and push out. Now, I went through some of my stash and I've got some northern white cedar which has a nice smell. It's nice and light. So the other thing I want to talk to you about is your bottom has to be strong, but at the same time you don't want to add a whole bunch of weight to the actual drawer because you've used a dense hardwood. So I tend to use soft woods, nice and light. Don't add a ton of excess weight to the drawer, just let the contents be what causes the drawer to weigh so much. So I would go through, and if I had the time, I would cut the best 2 pieces out of there and glue it together and make a panel, dimension it down, and be all set. Don't have that luxury today because I don't want to have to glue that up. So I've got some really nice wide northern white pine. It also has a nice smell to it, which is one of the big reasons for using solid wood. So what we need to do, and since I have the luxury of having quite a bit of this, I'm going to just cut a piece out of this and I'll avoid the knots and then we'll have to process it. The first thing we got to do is figure out the dimensions of this. So take our drawer, and this is where it pays to use a straight edge because you can drop it right into the bottom of the groove accurately. So if we sit that and run over to this one, we need it to be 14 and 15/16 long. Write that down. So here's our drawer bottom. This is the way the grain's running, so it's going to be 14 and 15/16 long. I'm going to double check that. Now I'll cut that 15 so I can go in the shooting board and make it fit perfectly. Now for length, or for width, pardon me, to come right to the back would be 12 5/8, and that's fine. This will move a little bit one way or the other, but This back is 11/16 wide, so there's lots of room there. You wouldn't want to have your bottom stop here and possibly pull in so there was a gap at some point of the year, and you don't want it to stick out too far beyond either. So I'm going to go right to get flush with the back, and that's going to be 12 5/8. Now, we don't want it too thick. However, that's a pretty big drawer to be just 1/4 inch pine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it thicker than that, and then I'm going to cut a rabbet or a rebate on 3 sides, so I'll fit it into that groove, and that'll just give it a little more strength, make it a little more solid feeling too, and sounding. We've got lots of room on the bottom. We could go as much as 9/16, but I'm going to say if we go 5/16, 3/8, I'm going to go 5/16. That doesn't sound like a lot more beyond 1/4, but I think it'll make a difference in how it actually behaves. So we want 14 15/16 by 12 5/8 by 5/16. All right, now where do we find it out of here? Nice thing about this material is that it rarely has end checks. Okay, I've got a knot there. If I can avoid knots, I'm going to. If I were to come down here, there's a section that's 20 inches with no knots at all. However, if I go back to this piece, since I'm going to end up cutting down this way, I don't need anywhere near that knot. So I think what I'll do, just take a quick look and see what the other side looks like. Those small knots are pretty tight. So if our length is going to be approximately 15, see those are tight knots. And we could even go in and put a little cyanacrylate super glue on those knots if we had to. This one looks loose, but these ones are nice and tight. Small pin knots like that, not going to bother me at all. So we'll go over first the chop saw, and we'll make a cut here to make sure that there aren't any checks that we're not seeing. And then from there we'll come over, well, for a rough cut like this, I'll probably cut it 15 1/4 in length. So that's going to put us somewhere around here. And then after that, we'll rip it to 12 5/8, and I'll probably go somewhere around 12 3/4. And then we'll bring it down to size with hand tools. The width.
Wait, you got a low corner here, so.
Okay, that surface is done. That's going to be the inside of the drawer. The outside or the bottom will get done after we fit it. So I'm going to do the rest of this with hand tools. First thing I want to do is get a nice straight edge on a long side. So that'll be the one that gets glued into the bottom. Now that I've got that straight, I can shoot the end. That's sticking out. I've got to cut a little chamfer down here to prevent it from tearing. A little more blade. Okay, now I'll retract that. Okay, now I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to set it right in the bottom of the groove. And I'll come over here and mark it so it's close. Now that's more material than I want to plane. So I'll go over to the table saw and I will cut this, leaving that line so we can come back and fit it perfectly. Okay, I'm just going to check my diagonals. That should be square. That's why I ripped the other side. So that is 19 and 13. And that's 19 and 13. Okay, so I didn't cut it right to length because I wanted to come in and perfect it. Take a little bit off of there. Cut my little chamfer on the end. Okay, that's one or two passes from being where I want it. You got quite a bit to cut off there, but that's okay. We'll do that after. Now, this being finished, I'm going to go in and use my marking gauge, and I'm going to put this. I got to keep this referenced. Okay, so this is going to be front. I'm going to go in and use my marking gauge to set that for 1/4 inch. Now I cut that with my drawer bottom plane. So I'm going to take one of those blades . junk in here. Okay, I'm going to use a marking gauge to cut a scribal line all the way around. I'm going to set it right off of the blade that I used to cut it. Okay. Now I'm going to reference off of the face. That's the one that I just planed. Put it in the vise, I can straighten it out. You can see how fast that is already cupped on me. That's not an issue. It'll get straightened out when we put it in the groove. But by putting it in my vise, I can straighten it out and just makes it a little easier to work. Now we don't need to do the back side. It doesn't fit into a groove. Now, need to decide how much of a reveal we're going to have all the way around. And we're only in there, I think, 1/8 of an inch. Yeah. So I'm going to set it for 3/16. Now this one is going to be cut on the top side, which is the actual bottom side of the drawer bottom. Just on 3 sides. Okay, I know how much I've got to take off. I'm going to go into that line and down to this line. I'm using a Lee Nielsen skew block plane. I've put an auxiliary fence on there. Now I need to have the blade exposed so that it's parallel to the sole. I like to have it set up so it's hanging over the edge just a little bit. I've removed the side plate. So I'm going to loosen this bolt, slide it back so that when the fence makes contact, if you happen to get, if that blade is allowed to go anywhere beyond that, it's going to leave a bad tear mark. This way, that leaves me a nice clean shoulder. So you don't have a lot of reference surface here, so you kind of have to pay attention to what you're doing because it would be easy to tip it one way or the other. And I just get into a rhythm of doing it, using more leg than arm. And I find it easier to keep it in position. But I won't go too far before I'll stop and see if I'm keeping that surface parallel to that surface or if I'm allowing it to tip. It looks pretty good. I still have, maybe a shy 1/16 to go. You just watch for that little bevel to appear that was created by the cutter on the marking gauge. Now, I'll do this other side. I left this wide so I can cut off anything that tears out here. Now this one I can simply gauge where my 2 rabbits, surface of my 2 rabbits. I don't know why this doesn't cut uniformly, but obviously my hand pressure varies somewhere along the path because almost always cutting a small rabbit like this, you'll end up taking more off of one end than the other and not taking it down uniformly. So you just have to watch it. Maybe a pass here in the middle. Now, I expect if I want a perfect fit, I'm going to have to come back and touch this up just a little bit. But it's pine, it'll compress a little bit as well, so. And the reason I'm being so particular, I'll say it again, if you put this in place so that it's glued into the drawer front and this bottoms out in the bottom of that groove, when that's fastened in place, that will prevent that drawer from being able to rack at all. So a bottom, as thin as it is, can really strengthen that drawer, which allows you again to use relatively narrow drawer sides and still come out with a strong drawer. Now let's just check this again. Okay, on a couple passes, I'll probably take one from each side. Always referencing off of my front. Not quite. Okay, that should do it that way, but I can tell I'm a little bit tight here. I'm going to show you something I forgot to do that actually will really speed up the process. Get the grain running better. Have that hanging out far enough that you can access it. Yeah, that's okay right there. And that's okay right there, so I'll do a little bit in the middle. Flip that around. Okay, that fits. Now I'm just going to cut a little chamfer right on that leading edge. Just so it'll make its way into the groove a little bit easier. If you're wondering what those marks are, that's from the brass marking gauge. Okay, that looks to be bottomed out. Now, just mark where we need to cut that. Okay, just get rid of those saw marks. I'm watching my pencil line. Okay, that's good. Now, next step, I just want to get rid of those saw marks. Now, we clean up this inside face. Okay. Now, before we put it in place, we have to account for that movement. Remember that this is going to want to expand, and if it's glued in the front, all the expansion has to go out the back. And that's a little bit wide for one. Could get away with it, but I'm going to put in 2. So I'll just divide this up into thirds, which should be 5, 10. Yeah, that looks good. So this is approximately 15 inches wide. So we'll mark it at the 5 and the 10 mark. And we can come in, we want to be right about, I would say we go right in the middle. So we'll come in about 3/8 of an inch. Now, sharpen my pencil. There's several options here. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and cut a slot. And that slot needs to be the width of the screw shaft, including the thread. And what we'll do is we'll drill a hole back here, and then we'll use the crosscut saw to cut that spot out. But here are the options. You can use a round-headed screw, and that will sit up on the surface. And I always try to use brass if I'm going to use something like that. I think it just shows better. You can use a countersunk head like that. Only problem is that when you cut your slot, you then got to come in with your chisel and cut a matching V-groove so that that lays in there properly. And sometimes I like to use these finish washers and just set that in there. I just think it looks just a little bit neater. And as long as you've got the clearance, and we have it underneath here, that's the distance from the groove to the bottom is 3/8 of an inch. And since this is only a 1/16 of an inch fatter than that, that will sit in there and won't bump anything when it's sliding in and out. So I'm going to measure that first. Get a drill bit to match. It's close enough to 1/8 of an inch. That's what I'll do. So I'm going to get an 1/8 inch drill bit. We'll drill those right at the end and then mark them, make the cuts, and install that. I should have marked that with a piece of tape. I didn't quite get all the way through. Okay, let's put this in place. Now, just before we drop that in, I'll go in and put a little bead of glue. Flush. Now, I'm just going to start those. I'm going to put this not quite all the way at the back. Actually, this is a dry time, so that's shrunk about as much as it is. I'm going to allow that about 1/8 of an inch. Don't put it too tight. You want that to be able to slide underneath the washer. I just want it tight enough that it holds it in place. Okay. Nice and clean on the inside, no gaps. Sometimes when you add the bottom, it just does let me try it first. Okay, it didn't happen this time. But beware, if that drawer bottom is a little bit tight, it has a tendency to spread that groove in the sides, which kicks that bottom out just ever so slightly and just ruins your nice tight fit. And you may have to come in and just adjust it ever so slightly. All that needs is a drawer knob, which I haven't decided on yet, and of course a drawer stop. But there's your drawer bottom installed, and a nice handcrafted drawer that'll outlive you. Hi, if you like my work, if you like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. And I've always said better tools make it a whole lot easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools, and also talk to you about our online and in-person workshops. Good luck in your woodwork.